Hello, and welcome to a new video. In this demonstration, we're going to cover how to change your oil. So, let's talk about why we need to change your oil. Oil never really goes bad, but what is inside oil is a bunch of additives, and those additives wear out, kind of like the eraser on your pencil. And it's our job to replace and replenish those additives. At the same time, we're going to get rid of a lot of contamination that's sitting inside the current oil. So, before we do that, we want to give the car an overall inspection. This is our opportunity as technicians to look at everything to see if there's anything else that might come up that might need replacing, or to see if we might need to plan to replace something in the future. So we're going to start by checking our fluids. You're going to need a rag, and we're going to need to know where our fluids are. I usually go in a horseshoe pattern, just start at one end of the vehicle and go on towards the other side of the hood. And right here is our master cylinder. Now, our master cylinder, on top of it is our brake fluid reservoir. The brake fluid reservoir holds our brake fluid. It's usually right by the brake pedal, somewhere on the driver's side where they're lined up. Sometimes it can be kind of hidden down there, but most of the time they're in this general area. This one's pretty nice. It has a see-through reservoir, so that we can just look at it and see what the level is. Sometimes it might help to take a flashlight and light up the reservoir so you can see the line better. Next is going to be the air filter. Our air filter is right here, but it can be in many places on many different cars. Attached to the air filter a lot of the times is our mass airflow sensor. The mass airflow sensor measures how much air goes in the engine, so the computer knows how much fuel to give it. But we're going to take this, pop it back, lift it up, and take out our air filter. Now our air filter, we want to look at the condition to make sure it's not damaged, but you really can't tell if it's worn out or clogged. We usually go off of mileage for that for gasoline cars. But a general rule of thumb is that if you can see light through it, hold it up to the light and see it, it's probably okay. We really want to go off of mileage. When we put the air filter back in, we want to make sure that we don't damage the seals and that they're in the right place. If air goes past the air filter and not through it, we can cause engine damage. So make sure that this sits in the saddle, push it down, and then you can put your clips back on. The next one is going to be our battery. We want to check the condition of the terminals and the posts and make sure that they're tight. They're not going to move anywhere. We also want to make sure the battery doesn't move, which this one does. It's not secured down. If it's a battery that's like this, sometimes they have caps. And these caps we can open up and look at the water level inside. And we may be able to service them. So if we pop the caps up with a little screwdriver, we can look down in there and see the water level. It looks good. It should be right below the top of the lid. If we need to add water to it, we want to add distilled water. This keeps the battery in the best shape possible by not altering the chemistry of the battery with all the extra minerals that non-distilled water may have. When I put this back on, there's some residual water around here. So I'm going to put the cap on, and then I'm going to take my rag and hold over the cap. So as I push the cap in, it doesn't spray acid all over the place, especially on my clothes. Okay, the next one is our coolant reservoir, or our expansion tank. Different manufacturers may call them different things. It's where the extra coolant goes when your engine gets warm. And it's right here. This one is kind of transparent, so you can use a light and see through it, or you can just take the cap up and use your flashlight and look inside the reservoir. Make sure you use the correct coolant for the correct car. If you follow the hose to that, it goes to our radiator cap. Our radiator cap should never be opened while the engine is warm or hot. It contains high pressure, high temperature fluid, coolant, and if you open it up, you can get instant third-degree burns. It's quite dangerous. In between these two, we have our transmission dipstick. Now, the transmission dipstick should not be checked with the engine off. If you have an automatic transmission with an automatic transmission dipstick, you should check it while the engine is running in neutral and or park. Otherwise, you're going to get a false reading. Let's go over here. And our next fluid is our engine oil dipstick. It's yellow. It even says engine oil on it. We're going to pull it out, wipe it right off. We don't trust it because as oil sits, as the cars run, it splashes oil everywhere. Oil has wicking properties to go up the stick and give us false readings. So we're going to put it back in all the way, pull it out, and now we're going to look at it. It needs to rest in between the 2 dots or hash marks of the dipstick. This one is full. It's worse to overfill your engine oil than it is to underfill your engine oil. But we want to be like Goldilocks and do it just right. The difference between each dot equals 1 quart on every car. So it's kind of a standard you can go off of so that you know how much you may need to add to your vehicle. Note that there's a little rubber seal on the end of these dipsticks. If that seal is damaged or broken, or if the dipstick is not put in all the way so that the rubber O-ring can seal, it can cause a vacuum leak. The engine is going to suck in unmetered air, which the mass airflow sensor didn't measure, and that will cause a check engine light. So really easy check engine light fix. Make sure that's sealing and it's all the way in. Okay, our next one is our washer fluid. The washer fluid, I recommend that you guys use winter grade washer fluid all of the time, even during the summertime, because you might go somewhere that is cold or you might not use it at all and wintertime comes and this thing will freeze, crack, and spill out all over the place. And when it does, you're going to need it because you're going to have ice and salt and all sorts of stuff on your windshield and you won't be able to see. So please use winter grade. Now, this one's nice. It's transparent. It's see-through. You can use your flashlight if you need to. And if it broke, it's really easy to replace. But most of the time, these are hidden in between the fenders or bumpers, and they are quite difficult to get at. So, next one, power steering fluid. This one says power steering fluid. Make sure that you use the correct type of fluid for whatever the car is. Otherwise, you may cause damage to the vehicle. Volkswagens, Porsches, and Audis are very specific with their type of transmission fluid, as well as some other car manufacturers. This one's transparent, so again, we can use our light or we can look through it. And it also has a dipstick, so we can wipe it off, put it back in, take it out, look at it, and to see the condition and if it's low or overfilled. Okay, before we start, we want to look at our belts. The condition of the belt, the flat side of the belt should not be super shiny or glazed. If it is, we want to schedule that in for replacement. On the other side of the belt, there are ribs. Those ribs should not be cracked. General rule of thumb is 5 cracks per inch. If you see 5 cracks per inch or more, we need to schedule that in to get the belt replaced so that it doesn't break on the customer and leave them stranded. Next, we want to look at these hoses, make sure they're in good condition, they're not hanging, they're not rubbing on anything, especially our coolant hoses. Give them a good squeeze to make sure they don't feel like a wet sponge or sticky. They could be deteriorating. We need to replace those before the customer gets stranded. Okay, the first step of our oil change is we take the cap off. This is the oil fill cap, and it tells us our engine oil, what grade of engine oil it has to have, and a lot of the times it tells us the weight of oil we need to use. This is imperative that it goes right here where the hood latches. The reason, sometimes we can get confused as technicians and we might be doing 5 Toyota Corolla oil changes at the same time, and we might think we have already put oil in this. When we close the hood, it stops. Yes, it might break the oil filter cap, the oil fill cap, but at least we save the engine. We don't send the customer out with no oil. Okay, let's lift this up and check out underneath. Okay, now that we have the car in the air, we're going to go grab our drain bucket. And position the pan underneath our oil drain plug. This is the pan that we want to use if we're going to use a shop vehicle because we want to reuse the oil. This doesn't get driven. We don't really need to replace the oil and the additives, but we're going to reuse it if it's a shop vehicle. If it's a personal or a customer's vehicle, we want to drain it directly into this. We'll grab a wrench, put it on the oil drain plug. lock your elbow and your wrist. Use your body to push away from you. That way you won't punch anything and have a red floor and say owie, owie, owie. And by the way, red floors just cause way too much paperwork, so we don't like them here. Now, once it's loose, you should be able to take it out with your hands. This should be pretty hot. So be careful, and as you take the drain plug out, push against it. When you push against it, you will be able to feel the end of the threads. Once you feel the end of the threads click, then we want to pull away and up, not down, so that we don't get covered with oil. So away and up, then we don't get covered in hot oil, and let this drain out. While it's draining, we want to inspect the drain plug. By looking at the threads to make sure they're not damaged, and there's a little gasket most of the time. We want to make sure that the gasket or the washer is in good condition. If it's damaged, we need to replace it. Sometimes the gaskets are one-time use. They're called a crush gasket, and they recommend you replace them every time you change the oil. This one's still in good shape, so we're going to reuse it. While we're waiting for this to drain, we also want to look up the torque specification. How tight do we make these? We don't want to over-tighten them because we're going to cause engine or vehicle damage. We don't want to under-tighten them because they'll come out and we'll have oil leaking everywhere. On this shop vehicle, the torque specifications are written on the oil pan. Please don't over-torque the vehicle so that we don't damage it. Now, we want to let this drain until it starts to drip like it's doing right now. We could let this sit and it would drip for months. Oil kind of sticks to everything, and that's just how it is. So we'll never get every drop of oil out of the engine, but until it starts to drip, that's about where we want to be. We also want to locate the oil filter. On this vehicle, remember, you can find all these component locations in ALLDATA under component locations, or in the maintenance section when you're doing those services. The oil filter for this vehicle is right here. And we want to wipe it up to make sure that it's clean and easy to grab onto. Move the pan over slightly because a little bit of oil is going to come out. And a lot of the times we can take our hands and twist it off without any tools. Sometimes you need a tool. On the back of the tool cart, we have oil filter pliers. These are adjustable. They're pretty awesome. And we can grab the oil filter with the pliers, get a really good grip on them, and loosen them up that way if we can't otherwise. Now, when we loosen this, the oil here will be hot as well. So we want to loosen it, spin it, and let it drop and drip so that it doesn't get us hot. We're going to let that go down while we put our drain plug back in. We grab our drain plug, and this time we have to torque it. So we're going to grab a socket and a torque wrench. Remember to set your torque wrench to the specified torque, and when you're finished with it, always put that torque wrench back to 0. We're going to put this in. We're going to wipe up any oil residue that we have and finish installing the plug. Take our torque wrench. Be careful and try to pay attention to that click. You guys can hear that. That can be pretty hard to hear in a loud and noisy shop, so watch for it and feel it. Okay, make sure we put this back to 0 and put the tools away. Then we're going to take our oil filter all the way off. Now, oil filters should be replaced with your oil change. Again, this is a shop vehicle, so we are going to reuse it. We don't want to waste any supplies. But we need to inspect the area for damage and for this. This is our oil filter gasket. The gasket is really important to make sure that it's on the oil filter. If it's not here, it's up there. And if we put 2 gaskets on, it will actually damage the vehicle by putting all the oil pressure out on the floor and possibly causing a lot of engine damage and a big mess. So make sure you take that gasket off. Then we're going to wipe up our sealing surface up on the engine. Now, I like to prime these with a little bit of oil. I'll take a little bit of new oil and just prime the surface so that it's a little bit wet, and then I take my finger with clean oil and put around the new gasket. That keeps it from vulcanizing or sealing or adhering itself to the engine frame, to the engine block itself. Put it back on, and just with my fingertips, I'm going to spin it on until it touches the surface of the engine. Now, a lot of the times you will not find a torque specification on how to tighten the oil filter. Sometimes they will. The newer the vehicle, the better chance you're going to find a torque specification for an oil filter. But general rule of thumb is on a passenger vehicle or on a customer's vehicle, 3/4 of a turn past touching. On this shop vehicle, because we do an oil change so much, we're going to do 1/2 turn, not 3/4. So I'm going to take my hands and quarter, another quarter, wipe up any oil residue that we might still have, and we're done. We're going to take this oil drain, push it out of our way so we can lower the vehicle and put new oil in it. Okay, now that we have the vehicle lowered, let's go ahead and put oil in it. Before we pour oil in it, we've got to use a tool. It's this magical tool, kind of like Harry Potter. It takes a small hole and turns it into a very big hole. We call this a funnel. We're going to put this in our oil fill area. We're going to take our oil, make sure we take this plug out. And we can pour it in. Now remember that on a normal car, not a shop vehicle, you're going to need to know how much oil goes in this. So make sure you refer to the owner's manual, service manual, or ALLDATA to find out how much oil and what kind of oil goes inside the vehicle. Make sure we put our plug back in the drain pan so we don't make a mess all over the floor. We'll put our oil funnel out of the way. We'll take that out. We want to make sure that they stay nice and clean, so wipe them up when you're done. And then we'll take our oil cap and put it back on the valve cover. Okay, if we check our oil, wipe it off, put it back in, take it out. It's not quite, it's actually a little bit overfilled. I'm not sure if we can see that, but it's a little bit overfilled. Always make sure you don't hold the dipstick vertically. Oil will fall down it, giving you a false reading. Hold it horizontal or down this way, but horizontal. So let's go ahead and start this and make sure that we don't have any leaks or anything's wrong with it. When we start the vehicle, we want to make sure all the tools and everybody else is out of the way. We have battery switches right here, so make sure that we tighten it up so the car will turn on. We're going to honk our horn once. If the horn doesn't work, then we yell honk. This lets everybody know to double check to make sure everything and everybody is out of harm's way. Then on an oil change, you're going to have an oil light come on in the dash. That's the oil pressure light. You should get pressure within 3 seconds. If you don't, you need to shut the vehicle off and find out why you're not getting pressure. Something's probably wrong. If the oil pressure light goes out within 3 seconds, step out of the vehicle or have your team members look underneath and on top to make sure that everything's in its place and we don't have anything leaking or dripping on the floor. Let's go ahead and do that. Honk! Okay, my oil light went out. I want to make sure nothing is spraying oil on the top, like we didn't leave a cap out or we didn't have a dipstick that's not put in right. And we're going to look underneath on the bottom and make sure that we don't see any drips, anything pouring out. And once that's the case, let's turn the vehicle off and check the oil one more time. We want to double check to make sure that our engine oil is still full, because if we check our oil, it's now a lot lower. The reason for this, you're going to have to explain to me on your work order. But there's a reason. So we need to make sure that we top it off so that it's like Goldilocks, it's nice and full. And then put away, clean up our lab area. Once that's finished, make sure you guys wash your hands, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.